All right. Welcome, everybody, to today's Segment 1 class for associates of our EA course. This is Media Monk, and Kimmery's on the line, as you could hear, and it's right at 2 o'clock. So I'm going to invite her to do as I am and start the recording, and I'll turn it over to Kimmery.
All right. It must start it for both of us, honey, because mine went from start to now stop. So when one of us does it, apparently it's making one recording, just for you to know. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Segment 1 monthly classes. Today, November of 2017, we're going to look at Mercury square, the nodal axis. Before we get started, though, here's your screen that shows how you can study with us at EAN. And if you have not yet gotten Segment 2 or Segment 3, the Segment 2 is Relationships, Segment 3 is Health and Wellness. They are on sale. Media Monk Leroy is running a special. There's never a special on digital, but if you want the materials, 25% off, or if you want materials and digital, which is both, you can get 25% off on segments 2 and 3. I think he's running this special for a month or so.
Mention it goes until the new year, and you have to mention the coupon code to apply it discount, because they're not priced that way on the website. You have to know the code, and that code is Capricorn. Capricorn.
In small
Most
letters.
Yeah, I don't think it's case sensitive on the code, but yeah, use small letters. And that sale, I think, is good through. We're going to run it all the way through the beginning of the new year. So, but get your Segment 2 class, your Segment 2 materials now. And I think we're making a decision on where we're going to go with Segment 2 in terms of these monthly classes sometime here in the near future.
All right, let's dig right in because I have a lot of slides to get through today. And this first slide is to just show you that in evolutionary astrology teachings, the planet, the sign, and the house are all the same archetypical principle. The example here, Mars, Aries, first house, all the same. As you start to go through today's material, we're going to look at that through the archetype of Mercury. And this month's class and next month's class, Mercury and Venus, they actually rule two archetypes of the zodiac as we look at it in current time, meaning this century, last century. And more on that in details as we go through it. For instance, here with Mercury, and this is going to be true for Venus as well, there's an outer and an inner archetype to Mercury and Venus, and this is coming from the polarities, basically. The outer type of Mercury with the active polarity is where it is ruling Gemini in the third house. And as you can see, both are mutable modality, but the outer Mercury is the air element. The inner side of Mercury, ruling Virgo in the sixth with passive polarity, is the earth element. Both of these archetypes, outer, inner, Gemini, Virgo, relate to the left brain and conscious mind. And from there, though, it does go in multiple directions. How's that for Gemini for you? We're going to look at Mercury with its rulership of Gemini in the third house archetypes, and then we'll look at it with the rulership of Virgo in the sixth. And so when we're looking at Mercury square the nodes, we will be bringing in both of these archetypes, the Gemini third house and the Virgo sixth house. And of course, we will then also add on in any particular chart where that natal Mercury is in its own sign and houses. So when we're looking at the inner side of Mercury, whoops, this is the wrong thing. This should say outer Gemini. Let me make a note here. There's my little Mercury details. Hold on, I gotta make a note with this so that I get this changed on the PowerPoints. That's supposed to be Gemini third house. I didn't catch when I did that one. We're looking at the difference here, okay, of Gemini and third house as the title, not the first little point. This is the archetype of classifying our physical environment. In other words, Mercury, Gemini, third house is where we want to have facts and data. We want to be able to label something, a desk or a pen or a telephone. We want to have language and communication. This is the need to be in our physical world and to label it in order to make sense of it and allow us to have an ease of understanding with each other and how everything works. Mercury, Gemini, third house is also the need for new experiences to expand conceptions of what anything is in relationship to our environment. Think about this. You read a new book to understand something new. You have a conversation with someone to understand something new about your physical environment. How many of us have conversations about the weather and its relationship to climate change as we are experiencing it, for example? It's also the need to build a logical framework of ideas that we can then rationally explain our relationship to the physical environment. So, for instance, the hurricanes that we had this year and all of the flooding that we've had. As we talk about it via climate change, we recognize there may be more and more flooding along close coastal areas. That conversation, that concept, those words allow us to explain what's happening in our environment, to know our environment. Mercury through Gemini third house is also the archetype of developing our mental powers and our intellectual abilities in order to logically order or make sense of our physical environment. Think about how you just evolved from a baby to a child to an adult. You're continually evolving yourself on an intellectual level. You're continually expanding what you know, but then putting it all back together into understanding your world, your environment. Mercury through Gemini in third house is the archetype of our natural intellectual curiosity. It's the desire to have these new experiences and to have all kinds of different experiences and situations that then again allow us to understand our world in broader and broader frameworks. Understanding our world at 10 years old is a lot different than when we become 20 or 50 years old. All of these experiences that we have through our life, Mercury is continually explaining them, trying to make 1 + 1 = 2 and add them all together to make sense for us. So this is where Mercury becomes the archetype of physical laws in the universe versus the metaphysical laws or the polarity Jupiter with his rulership of Sagittarius and the 9th house. Gemini, 3rd house Mercury, we must verify the facts. We must know them through the physical senses. We must hold the pen in our hand. We must take a drink of water. We must see the flood zone plain for ourselves when it comes through our neighborhood. And then what this also does is classifying everything in this physical world. It allows us to develop our quote unquote point of view, our orientation to how we look at all this intellectual stuff in our world and how our point of view helps us create a foundation of our world, especially our physical world, that can then give us a sense of security. Now, Mercury through Gemini 3rd house also is a dual archetype of intellectual security, which is that point of view we just explained, versus intellectual curiosity. So Mercury will be both attracted to new information and experiences, but it will also be repulsed by new information and experiences. In other words, this dual archetype between security and curiosity will have the potential to limit or color what information we choose to take in and what information we choose to exclude. And this will then create what we will call the archetype of intellectual limitations. In other words, when we want to exclude an experience or information, it is because we have a need to be secure on a mental level, and you can even include emotional because you don't get out of your senses in the physical body. And so I don't want to look at that piece of information because it will make me feel insecure. The person who has a spouse cheat on them, and a friend comes up and says, your husband is cheating on you. Nope, nope, don't want to hear it. I don't believe you. I'm not going to look at that because it will totally uproot all of the foundations that they've put together for security reasons. You can take this on any subject you want to imagine. And again, we will be attracted to and repulsed by or limit or even refuse to take in certain experiences, ideas, and information if it's going to upset the apple cart. And so what will happen here is there's going to be cyclic implosions and cataclysms in which the logical structure of our intellectual organization or foundation just disintegrates. Somebody's going to continue. We're going to have a second person and a third person come up to us and say, your husband is cheating on you. You're going to have the information just be revealed to you in some type of way on some subject matter to the point that it just throws you into chaos. It's similar to when Mercury goes retrograde as well. Mercury turning retrograde is a natural time period for an implosion or to go inward. The mind is saturated with what it can take in, and it's got to go in and review and reevaluate and throw off to try and create a new intellectual foundation of what makes sense for us on a left brain conscious level. So from time to time, we will have, again, implosions and cataclysms that then has us reorganizing everything we know on an intellectual basis into a new foundation that then allows us to recreate security. Mercury through Gemini in the third house is also the archetype of communications, especially as a means to relate to someone else. All you have to do is think about relationships in your world. Where would they be if you couldn't communicate? If you couldn't speak, if you didn't listen, if you couldn't send notes to each other, if you couldn't text or email? You know, it's not just verbal, it's also written. But Mercury through Gemini third house, this is where we really learn that give and take of communications with someone. This is where we can have a commonality of understanding what a pen is, or how to drive a car, or how we are going to take care of chores in a household. Now, what can happen is communications then will also allow us to release any buildups of mental energy. We've got to be able to speak. How many times can you feel frustrated with someone you're in relationship with because you just want to speak to them? My situation with my family, as Leroy very commonly understands or has gotten to know after 16 years, is after I have a weekend with all of my family, and especially when they stay in my household, I've got to have conversation. I've got to have my husband be willing to process with me various things that were said and various things that were did. I need that communication in order to just release all that energy that builds up in a family of origin and find my equilibrium again. Of course, communications also offer ways to bring in new information. And when somebody has a lot of Mercury aspects, a lot of planets in Gemini or the third house, they can get to the extremes of where they talk without ever stopping to take a breath. The compulsive talker. This is also the archetype of disintegration. When we are trying to have 1 + 1 = 2, and we want to feel secure through knowing our physical environment, it can lead to one more piece of information, one more class, one more experience, one more, communication with the partner to explain our world and feel secure. And when there is not that metaphysical system, the polarity here of Jupiter ruling Sag in the ninth, we don't have any way to integrate all the facts. They are just randomly out there going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And no matter what point of view you take, I'm going to argue back with you. We've got to be able to go sometimes over to that polarity point and see that larger picture to recognize the whole is greater than the parts that make it up. Sometimes 1 + 1 actually equals 3 when we get into the metaphysical perspective of things. And so it's sometimes necessary to have this, again, implosion or disintegration to have us opening up beyond left brain into right brain. So, Mercury through Gemini in the third house is the archetype of perpetual cycles of contraction and expansion. And the contraction cycle comes when we reach information overload. The left brain is saturated. I can't read one more book. I can't have one more conversation. I need to go within. I need to quiet down. I need to listen to my inner voice. Right brain, intuition. And we will go through these cycles of contraction and then expansion because they progressively bring us into awareness of the intrinsic limitation of, I can't pronounce this word, an imperfectly orientated mind. What the logical left brain, physical orientated mind can know in and of itself. These cycles of contraction and expansion also teach us that our foundation, whether it's intellectual, emotional, or both, our foundation is in movement itself. My foundation is in movement itself. Very popular Mercury phrase. So here, now I got it right. The inner Mercury, which is its rulership of Virgo in the 6th house, is again that passive polarity and the earth element. Water and earth elements are always energy returning back to the center. They relate to passive polarity. Fire and air elements are always energy moving out from the center, the active polarity. So here, Mercury through Virgo in the 6th house is the archetype of mental self-analyzation. This is where we look at the ability of Mercury to take all these facts and information and figure out how everything relates to everything else. We're starting to make sense of it. Virgo 6th house squaring Gemini Sag, and Sag being that whole that we put it together with. Virgo 6 is that process by which we do that. And so this mental self-analyzation is going to bring natural cycles of introspection. And of course, when we turn inward into ourself, what are we doing? We're analyzing ourself. Who am I? And how am I compared to this person or that situation? It becomes a natural method for learning lessons of personal humility, service to the whole, and purging the grandeur that came from the Leo fifth house archetype that came before Virgo in the sixth. So that mental self-analyzation will also bring lessons of discriminating. Yes, no, this, not that. Lessons of purification and self-improvement. So I've got all this information. What do I do to take myself into tomorrow? What is the next step that I want to do in helping myself evolve and grow? It is an archetype of change and adjustments. In other words, here, Mercury through Virgo in the sixth house recognizes that other people have ideas and opinions and beliefs just as much as we do. It is also an ability to recognize again what needs to evolve within ourselves. That's self-improvement. What do we need to eliminate or adjust within ourselves that's not kosher or in tune with where our evolutionary process is going? I need to get up off the couch and exercise a little more. I need to pay a little more attention to my diet. This is where Virgo in the sixth house becomes related to that archetype of diet, exercise, and rest, because those are key components to the host's self-improvement process. The archetype of change and adjustment, though, will also be where we are learning to transition from egocentric to ego-concentric awareness. Again, back to realizing that somebody else also has ideas and opinions. There is more to it than just what's me. How do I go from including me to someone else as well? A larger awareness. And so, definition of egocentric: an individual relating their self-identity to larger and larger wholes, to the universe itself. And this is that polarity Neptune with rulership of Pisces in the 12th house. You've heard that Aries through Virgo is self, Libra through Pisces is others, and we go from Libra one-on-one all the way up to Pisces everything, the totality of consciousness among all species. And so egocentric is trying to, it's the pebble dropped into the pond and rippling out larger, 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 larger. And so this is what the Virgo sixth house side of Mercury is trying to do. Well, how do I adjust something? How do I look at it a little differently so I expand my awareness? And this eventually is going to again teach us that there's more to reality than just the physical environment. Neptune Pisces 12 many times being the non-physical environment. And there's more to reality than just our own perspective. And Mercury through Virgo in the sixth house is the archetype of recognizing a standard of right conduct. Now, the standard of right conduct can be any system of thought that promotes self-improvement, self-knowledge, self-awareness, evolution. However, in this patriarchal conditioning world of ours, it becomes important that we can sometimes examine another Virgo sixth house word. We examine the basis for the standards of right or wrong conduct. We get all kinds of them coming at us. We could even include parental in this perspective as well, because what's the first standards of right and wrong conduct? Mommy says yes, mommy says no. So we have these standards conditioned upon us via family, via society, via religion, all kinds of ways. And one of the things that Mercury through Virgo in the sixth house will do is go, well, what do I feel is a standard of right conduct for me versus what I have been taught or conditioned with? And of course, depending upon the degree of conditioning we've had, we can have an induction of guilt when we're not aligning with whatever the perception of right conduct is. If you've been brought up with a lot of heavy religious conditioning, I have reconnected with a dear friend after 30 years, and we got together yesterday, and she was telling me about a younger brother who moved his family from West Coast to East Coast, and they are so strictly evangelical they don't socialize outside their church. And in the process of moving, the oldest son, who is 22, decided to relocate with them and finally got the courage to come out and tell these parents that he was gay. And all of the guilt that was induced upon him, he was giving the ultimatum that he would either flip the switch or he was going to be thrown out of the family with nothing whatsoever to do with him anymore. He acquiesced and flipped the switch and told my friend, his aunt, for now, this is what I've got to do with my family. I know it's not right for me. I know I'm going to have to break out, but I can't do it yet. So there's that guilt where we are made to feel like we must atone. The opposite of that is guilt linked to anger and standing up and saying, I must be myself. And if it means you can't love me unconditionally and you've got to throw me out of the family, so be it. So that standard of right conduct then also allows us to make those changes and adjustments to align with whatever we perceive to be our evolving standard of right conduct, and that allows us to self-improve. And what this starts to teach Mercury through Virgo in sixth house is that we can't pray ourselves perfect. Perfection is a process that is done through action and effort. It's not through Mercury thought alone. It must be acted upon. So this is also the archetype of what we call crises. And this is where Mercury through Virgo in the sixth house will have these cyclic mental crises that then induces that mental self-analysis that exposes our behavioral patterns. And those behavioral patterns, again, are going to be based upon these standards of right, wrong conduct. Now, if we're going to respond positively to the crises, we make the self-adjustments, self-improvements, all the self-words. We expand in self-knowledge that then allows us to make changes that align with our standard of conduct, right conduct, or even evolve that standard of right conduct. If we have a negative response to the archetype of crises here, we get into those famous Virgo sixth house words of procrastination, rationalization, excuse making, inner outer criticism. We're either unable or refuse to make whatever necessary changes or actions are in front of us. So again, it brings up that lesson here of one foot in front of the other. Self-improvement doesn't come from thinking alone. It needs movement, it needs action, and in the process of moving, it helps to create clarity of thought and evolve through any crises that is going on. Mercury through Virgo in the 6th house is also the archetype of work and service to the greater whole. And this then allows for sustainment of the group, be it a country, a culture, or society, or even a family unit. Now, some cultures allow us the freedom to choose our type of work, and in some cultures, the work is assigned for us. Either way, freedom or being assigned, this teaches the lessons of serving the needs of more than just ourself. In other words, our personal desires and needs are quote unquote sacrificed in order to fulfill needs and desires of the larger group. This work function and service to the whole then will also teach us practical methods and techniques and skills that we can then establish and apply to any work-related function within our culture, our tribe, our society, our country, however it happens to be. All right, so that's briefly those archetypes of inner and outer Mercury. Hopefully it is giving you enough of a grasp of this archetype. There's probably a lot more details, Mercury, that of course we could always go into, but for sake of time here, let me just move on for us. Now we're going to go into familiar material that we're going to look at every single class in this series. Nodal axis astronomy. The north node is where the moon's path crosses above the ecliptic. The south node is where the moon's path crosses below the ecliptic. And the ecliptic, of course, is where the sun appears to be traveling around the earth, even though it's actually us moving around the sun in the astronomical world. Here's a visual for you. Here you can see where the moon is traveling, and here's the moon going up. Well, right here it goes north of the sun's path, north node, above the ecliptic here. 2 weeks later, its path goes south of the ecliptic, and you have the point of the south node, point of the north node. Because the moon is so close to Earth, north node and south node are always exactly opposite each other. When you get to the nodes of the other planets, as they get further and further away from Earth, their nodes are not exactly opposite each other. Now the nodal axis precesses or moves backwards through the zodiac, through the chart. Takes about 18.5 years to make a complete circle through the zodiac. This backwards movement signifies a return to universal source on a solar, sun, lunar, moon level. The nodal axis, though, is not always retrograde 100% of the time. It's retrograde 90% of the time, direct 10%. The 90% retrograde motion of the nodes means that we create a stronger sense of destiny earlier in our life on an egoic basis. Again, this is based upon evolutionary astrology. Observe, correlate, observe, correlate. And of course, all you have to do is look at your astrological chart printouts to see whether or not there is an R or an RX behind the symbol for the node, to know whether or not it's moving retrograde. If it is, it will have the RX behind it. In that 18.5 year cycle, the nodal axis transits spend about 18 months in each sign of the zodiac. The south node is the soul's ego from the past. the accumulation of all the emotional residues from all our past lives. It represents security because it's already known from the past. It represents karma on all its many levels, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. It is a point of familiarity, both positive and negative. Positive, it is the gifts that we have accumulated through prior efforts, the talents we bring through. Negative, it can be the Achilles heel, that weak link or weak point that we keep coming back to, and the circular hamster wheel that we just don't get off. It can be a point of stagnation. It was that prior mode of emotional operating that allowed the prior dynamic of our soul or Pluto to be actualized. You will look at the number of aspects that the South Node makes to determine other areas used in the past to actualize the prior karmic dynamic by natal Pluto. And you will also look at the rulers of the South Node by both sign and house and the aspects they make, additional information about how the ego operated in the past, fulfilling the soul's requirements in the past. The North Node is the leading edge of the soul's ego in this life. It is emotional growth and evolution. It will represent insecurity because it's unknown, uncharted territory. It represents the Dharma responsibilities. It represents the future we're trying to move into. It is a sense of destiny, and it has a magnetic pull forward. The North Node is a point of movement versus the stagnation of the South Node. The North Node is pulling us forward, the ego's evolution. It is the current mode of operation on an emotional level that is going to allow us to actualize the evolutionary intent in this life, or the polarity point of natal Pluto in this life. You would also look at the aspects that the North Node makes to determine other areas that we're utilizing in this lifetime to actualize that evolutionary intent. And you would also look at the rulers of the North Node by sign and house and the aspects they make for additional information in how the soul and its ego is intending to evolve and move forward in the current life. Now, when we look at that nodal axis, this is true natally and this is true by transit, okay? The past, South Node, and the future, North Node, are always in the tension of the present moment, which is represented by the moon. So in a natal chart, you'd look where the South Node is, you'd look where the North Node is, and you'd look where the moon is by its own sign, house, and aspects. If you wanted to, you can get out your calendar or your ephemeris and you can see where the transiting South Node is, the transiting North Node is, then you can see where the transiting moon is to tell you where this is happening right now in the current moment as we speak. Something to recognize, though, is the past is always trying to shape the future in the present moment. In other words, we are many times projecting the past forward for security reasons. We do this in the natal chart, and we do this in the transit of the nodal axis and moon in the current moment. Thank goodness the mean motion of the nodes is retrograde, because that helps us in throwing off the past, leaving it behind, and moving forward. So now moving into planets square the nodes. In evolutionary astrology, we call this skip steps. And the key to realize here, when you're looking at a natal chart, is both the South Node and the North Node were active in past lives. Both nodes were creating karma in past lives. And when a planet is square the nodes, that planetary archetype skips back and forth between those two nodes, and it doesn't integrate the archetypal lessons of that planet, as we're going to look in today's class. That means Mercury, the left brain conscious mind, is not being integrated, and it's really not integrating either node as well, because as soon as one node starts to represent some insecurity, the planet will skip to the other node. In Mercury's case, its ability to mentally process, its ability to analyze, its ability to communicate, to put the puzzle together, gets confused, gets arrested, because it's going back and forth between those two nodes. Of course, as we have already spoken in a previous class, one of the exceptions is Sun square the nodes. There's karma, but we don't skip the Sun because it is such a life force, being the center of the solar system. Now, when we have these skip steps and we go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and that planetary archetype is stuck, it's not really evolving as it is meant to do, we look for what EA calls the resolution node. And that is the way through the skip steps. That's the way out of the confusion, out of the stagnation, out of the mess. And how we do that from a astronomy perspective is the resolution node is the node that last crossed over the planet. Now the nodes again move retrograde or a clockwise fashion. So how you look at it is you can start with the planet and you reverse your way around the signs. You reverse your way through the houses of the zodiac to the first node you come to, and that is your resolution node. When the resolution node is the south node, that planetary archetype must be resolved through consistent application via the south node. In other words, where is that south node by sign and house and its rulers and aspects, etc.? That's where you must apply that planetary archetype. In today's case, Mercury and communications. You must go back to the past in many ways, south node, and redo it to really create that consistent bottom line for the planet to evolve, in this case Mercury, communications and processing, etc. And once you do that, then it allows that north node to begin to move forward rather than remaining stuck in the skip steps along with the south node and the planet in question. When the resolution node is the north node, then that planetary archetype must be resolved through consistent application via the north node. In other words, it's about moving forward. The future north node must be that bottom line. Okay, how do I take another step forward? How do I take another step forward? How do I learn to communicate more clearly? How do I learn to interact more with others? How do I learn to process information better? How do I learn to look at myself, self-analyzing better, etc., etc.? And if we're working to consistently move that planetary archetype forward, the south node will become unstuck. And it will then metamorphose and release itself from the past and evolve as well. Now, I put these two slides in for us. In other words, because the nodes move reverse through, they move in a clockwise fashion, all the nodes are compared to all the planets, all right? So in these two examples, we start with Uranus and we follow this inner circle around until we get to the south node, and that south node is making a waxing gibbous opposition. It's not quite exact yet to Uranus. If we look at the north node relationship to Uranus, we start with Uranus. We reverse through the signs and the houses, moving in a clockwise fashion until we get all the way to the north node. And the north node is making a balsamic conjunction to Uranus. North node is moving this way. The north node is getting ready to conjunct Uranus. Now, I finally got this slide updated to how I myself have evolved in teaching astrology. In Jeffrey Green's original teachings, he would always compare the faster moving planet to the slower moving planet, with the exception of the sun, and all planets would be compared to the sun. I have moved on to looking at how we live in such a geocentric or earth-centered perspective, and we're orientated that way. I compare the personal planets, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, to the sun. But I compare the sun to the outer planets. Moon through Pluto, I compare faster to slower. Okay, just like it says right up here. But to give you a couple of examples, for instance, if we look at Mercury's relationship to Pluto right here, we're starting with Pluto and we go counterclockwise, moving through the signs and the houses till we get to Mercury. Mercury is making balsamic conjunction to Pluto. If we look at Venus's relationship to Pluto, we again start with Pluto, the slower moving planet, and right here we go to Venus. And Venus is new phase Pluto. It's past that 10 degrees, so it's not a conjunction, but it's new phase. Every planet has a phasal relationship to every other planet. And when you are a beginner to astrology, you start with the phase between two planets, and then you fill in the details with a specific aspect. And if we look at the relationship of Sun and Saturn, again, I compare the Sun to the slower moving planets, Jupiter on out. So you start with Saturn, and I go all the way through, moving counterclockwise through signs and houses to the Sun. And the Sun is balsamic phase Saturn. So this is a change that I've kind of made over the last few years in just my own interpretations. You're free to follow Jeffrey's original. You're free to evolve into this. However, it makes sense for you in your own observe and correlate as an astrologer. Skip steps. Here is the math in looking at the skip steps. We're looking at Pluto square the nodes here. And so you start with Pluto and you reverse through the zodiac and houses. And here, when we get to the nodes, Pluto's at 16 degrees Virgo, nodes are at 22. The north node is the resolution node. And if you look at this purple line here, the nodes are applying squares. If the nodes were at 16 degrees, Gemini Sag, exact from Pluto, they'd be an exact square. And if we had to go all the way to 12 degrees, the nodes would be separating squares. And the interpretation is the same way as you would look at any aspects. I'm realizing I can create another slide here, making a note to myself. When something isn't applying to an aspect, there's more tension. There's more frustration. You feel that aspect building up. When it's exact, it's the intensity of the change by whatever aspect is described. And when it is separating aspects, there is a little almost relief because, oh, I get this. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is what it means. This is how it's happening. So there's the buildup of pressure and an applying aspect. There is a relief of pressure when it is a separating aspect that's going on. Here is the cycle of phases and aspects that was originally from Dane Rudier. Jeffrey Green then adopted it, and I took it from him and expanded it a little more. And this is the whole cycle of aspects from 0 to 360, including the 8 phases that we're going to look at. If you are a beginner to astrology, you would want to go back to the webinars in which I broke down the cycle of phases and aspects and did all the math to them. I want to say that was somewhere in 2014 or 15. But if you just go into your registered area of our website and look at the search function and just Google cycle of phases and aspects, it will draw up the webinars for you to watch. And there I think I did 4 classes. I think I did 90 degrees each class. And then at the tail end, the 5th class, I did the math. So you might want to go to that 5th class and just really get the math first if you're a real beginner to all of this. Okay, that's all the information I have. And so now we're ready to go into chart example. And I made it through pretty good. Okay. So I'm going to take a break, but before we go into our chart example, let me just touch in with Leroy and see if there's any questions, comments, anything that I missed.
No, you're pretty clear on the board. We just have our volunteer. I want to test her mic. So
Okay.
if today's volunteer is available, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you now to test that. We've been exchanging some private messages here. Are you there, Candace?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Very
Can you
well.
hear me?
Yep, we can.
Yay!
Loud and clear. Thank you, honey. So let me do what
Thank you, Laura.
let me do what we typically do during these classes, okay? I'm just going to briefly, for sake of recording and everyone else, go over the basics in your chart. And then I want to hear, first of all, from you on what was sparking for you listening to class today. And then we'll take it from there. And so first of all, this ES is evolutionary state. We're going to explore that as we work with everything over the next hour. This volunteer had a Christian upbringing, Protestant, not real strong. There were 5 siblings in the family. Where were you in birth order, volunteer?
Second.
So you were second of 6 siblings. Got it.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Her parents divorced pretty early when she was young. Were you still at home when they divorced?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Our volunteer has been married for 45 years. She has 3 children. She has 4 grandchildren. Together with her husband, they have a bed and breakfast acreage that they work with. And I think she's also an avid gardener as well, working their property that they have, I think, out somewhere out in the Northwest. If you feel that there's other environmental conditionings that are relevant as we go through the next hour, you are welcome to share them, but let me go through our basics with this chart. We're going to be looking at full chart interpretation today with the focus on Mercury square the nodes. What we have here, birth data, March 17th, 1947, 6:55 a.m., Chariton, Iowa. I had put out Porphyry because I just didn't know when I said the email, but our volunteer is coming to evolutionary astrology using the Placidus house system. So this is drawn up for Placidus houses, all right? We have a fifth house Pluto in Leo, 11 degrees. It is retrograde. You can see we have an 8 degrees Aries rising, so almost all the planets are going to be in the same sign and house, which can make for an easier interpretation sometimes because you're not having to blend a sign and a house. It is the same archetype. She has Saturn retrograde as well, 2 degrees Leo fifth, balsamic that Pluto. So we have a balsamic Saturn Pluto conjunction here for our soul. Of course, this sets up an 11th house polarity point, and we have Venus over here at 14 degrees Aquarius, 11th house, sitting right on the Pluto polarity point. Venus happens to be the ruler of one of the nodes, the north node over here. Here's the south node though. South node's in Sag. See this RX right here? She was born with the nodes retrograde, which 90% of us are. South node at 5 Sag in the 8th house. Ruler by sign Jupiter is over here at 27.5 Scorpio retrograde. It's little over, no, it'd be 25 to get to 10 degrees away. So Jupiter, the south node is a balsamic conjunction to its ruler by sign Jupiter. It's 8 degrees if you're looking at that math fast enough. The ruler of the south node by house is Pluto, the soul itself. The north node's over here at 5 degrees Gemini in the second house. Mercury, which is square the nodes, it rules the north node, and this Venus over here opposite Pluto, conjunct the polarity point, rules the north node by house. Now, if we look at Mercury square the nodes, Mercury is over here in Placidus houses intercepted in Pisces, and it is retrograde. We have a Mercury retrograde in addition to being square the nodes. Now here's the math, okay? Mercury's 10 degrees Pisces, or 10.5. As you reverse through the zodiac, the signs, the houses, going clockwise, you have to go past 10 degrees, which would be exact. You go to 5 degrees to get to this south node. So the nodes are separating squares from Mercury. And remember, separating squares, it's quite possible that this soul had had Mercury square the nodes in most recent past life, or they had been making some effort in dealing with these planets square the nodes. So they're a little bit, they're on that relief of the pressure. Oh, I get it. This is what I have to resolve with Mercury square the nodes. So the resolution node here is going to be the south node. Now, we're going to skip ahead a little bit because this is a pretty tight new phase conjunction of Mercury to Mars. Mars is 10 Pisces, 6 minutes. Mercury is 10 Pisces, 22 minutes. Mercury is only 16 minutes, a quarter of a degree beyond Mars. That is combust. When you have a conjunction less than 30 minutes or half a degree, it's called combust in astrology. So it is emphasized conjunction, so to speak. It will be hard to separate Mars square the nodes out of this. I will do my best to do so and delineate both of these planets square the nodes for you. So here again, the resolution south node is a separating square from Mars as well. All right. And of course, with having Mercury and Mars in Pisces and the 12th house, the ruler of these two planets is Neptune over here, just inside the descendant 7th house cusp, retrograde at about 10 degrees Libra. So that's just pointing out some details. I'll point out more for you in regards to interpretation and this Mercury square the nodes. However, as we typically do, I'd like to just get feedback from our volunteer on what you learned or what clicked or what sparked for you listening to some of these slides from today's class. Is that okay?
Sure.
Let's put you on the spot, Mercury and Pisces in the 12th house.
Yeah, right. Perspective. Kim, it feels like it's been many lifetimes about getting the correct perspective of it all.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Mercury. Let's just stop right there, Candace, if I may, and if you need to jot notes down. Mercury, left brain, conscious mind, ruler of Gemini, Virgo. It's over in the opposite sign of Virgo, Pisces. It's in the 12th house. Your Mercury signature is, coming from a right brain perspective of seeing the whole before the pieces. So it creates that push-pull. It creates that switching of the brain, Mercury, between left and right, which can bring in confusion. And it can bring in, do I look at the big picture first or do I start looking at the details? And then with Mercury retrograde, Mercury's being, kind of pushed over to that opposite archetype of Virgo in the 6th. So your statement that you feel like you've spent lifetimes trying to figure out your perspective, did I paraphrase that right?
Well done.
Yeah. That can so much be it. I'll say more on that, but I don't want to interrupt you all the time, and I want to give you a chance to speak. What would you have you worked any with Mercury square the nodes? Have you come across? I should just say our volunteer is newer to discovering evolutionary astrology. Is that correct?
As deeply in depth with you. I've been studying the squares and the nodes since 2009.
Okay, sure.
However, it feels like such a vast project that I still am out in space. Honestly, I really am.
Mm-hmm. When you say you've been studying it since 2009, have you known this concept of skip steps and resolution nodes since then? Or you just knew you had the aspect? Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any details or hits that sparked for you as we've been going through this class material?
Yes, wonderful. It seems to me that in a way I am just learning how to have a voice and to think. I recognize that this has been an angry lifetime, and angry because I can't figure it out. It feels like something's missing, and it's about the perspective and then how to communicate. So I've been looking for stability somewhere that explains it. I know I'll be able to speak more clearly probably after I've listened to this about 5 times.
Sure. Don't worry about that at all. Okay. One of my favorite One of my favorite sayings with EA, and I'm a Pluto Virgo, and so I had to take a spoonful of my own medicine about 100 times a day, and Leroy will second that. Judge less, discern more. And so one of the big things that has been so beautiful for me personally with evolutionary astrology is to get out of all our conditioning factors of judgment, and as with Mercury and what we've learned here, that people recognize it with the Sag and Pisces archetypes, but they don't always recognize those polarities, Gemini and Virgo. And this is again that Virgo, that standard of right, wrong conduct, and just how guilt inducing that can be for, so many of us. And so from a mental perspective, and you have Sun in Pisces, okay? You have Neptune over there in Libra, seventh house. You can get easily caught up in, you know, the confusion or the guilt linked to anger, the anger because again, where's my voice? I can't speak. And then that just is all caught up in that standard of conduct of beliefs and, religions that, well, I'm not going to get it right, so I don't know what to do. And therefore, it can almost sometimes be all over the place. It's almost for you with this Mercury so tight, new phase Mars, that your actions speak louder than words. And it would be that you would want to have your actions out in nature to sometimes get past all the confusion. You are a right brain orientated person with Mercury in Pisces 12th, trying to figure out how to exist in this left brain orientated westernized world of ours. And
Amen.
And as your soul has come through lifetimes of experiences, and especially trying to find your own way and be in charge of your own destiny, as you've come through all of these, patriarchal conditionings, you've tried to evolve your understandings, left brain, right brain, of how the world operates. And as with many or most of us, we lost our way or had natural law suppressed and distorted till it ended up in confusion and I don't know what's right, I don't know what's wrong. And it has led you into battles with others, power struggles with others, communication struggles with others, be they verbal battles or be they, you know, uh, battles in the name of whatever you believed was right. And so, like most of us, to say that a different way, the same way, like most of us, there has been all of the patriarchal conditionings that we are now unlearning. And so if we look at your resolution node being the south node in Sag, 8th house, Jupiter there, first of all, it's about you going back and finding what is natural law for you, Sagittarius. It will be emphasized by finding it through nature. And you live in nature, correct me if I'm wrong. You guys have a couple acres of property where you run your I'm going to say Airbnb, excuse me, where you run your B&B, finding your way back to natural laws, whatever you perceive them to be, that allow you to go deep on psychological levels, ruler Jupiter, Scorpio, 8th, will then allow this calming down energy right here that allows Mercury to then be able to go over and process and think and speak and to be comfortable speaking your own words. Doesn't matter right, wrong, better, less. This is what feels right for me to speak in this moment in my learning process. Does that make sense?
Beautifully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say I do remember. I should say I know that I've done a session for you. I don't remember anything I said. So if I have anything that was said previously that sparks for you, you're welcome to share that. But I do remember um, from some of your environmental conditionings, you did get involved with a mystical church for almost a couple of decades, but after time, you realized that it was still pretty patriarchally based. You broke free from it as you made that recognition.
Yes.
Again, I can rattle, so let me stop for a moment and comments, questions.
I remember when we did the reading that that seemed like the thing that stuck out to me was your reading of the Saturn Pluto, and it was about the strong will.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense that you
Yes,
remember that?
yep, okay, yep, I do. When Saturn is a balsamic conjunction to Pluto or balsamic phase to Pluto, anywhere from the 270 mark to 360, when Saturn's last quarter to balsamic conjunction Pluto, Saturn has to surrender to Pluto. And that can be tough for Saturn, especially if you're looking at a double signature Leo 5th house. Wait a minute. I have my will. I want to express my will. I have to express my will or I will have no sense of myself, especially with all these Piscean planets. And what Saturn is having to do, balsamic conjunction to Pluto, is Leroy's famous quote, excuse me, I will my will, divine will. And so you're having to shift from trying to do it on a conscious, Saturn individuated consciousness, egoic Leo level to learning how to do it on a deep soul level. So there is a strong lesson with the signature of learning that polarity objectivity versus all the Leonian 5th house subjectivity. And so here's Venus over here, okay, again, conjunct that Pluto polarity point in Aquarius, helping you with the objectivity, really being deeply objective about what you value and what you need versus Mercury square the nodes, everybody else coming at you with their beliefs and their opinions, telling you this is what's truth for you. And so Venus, even though it's not resolution node, I'm going to make this point. Venus as ruler of the North Node means as this life goes by, you will eventually get to that point where you start to objectify what are the deepest values for you. And you will make the choice. You will make the choice, Gemini here with this North Node. I will live by what I value. Now, with that resolution node being the South Node, it means going back to the past. So it means that you've had to come through a lot of deja vu experiences in this lifetime of where there have been confrontations with others. Okay, Sag will bring confrontations. Scorpio 8th house will bring confrontations, confrontations with others in which you've been confronted with your beliefs and you've had to then review them, ponder them. Confrontations between power versus powerless, and it again will be coming off of an old miasm, an old karmic energy within the soul that if I don't will my way through, it just won't happen. It won't manifest. And through these confrontations, you've been really deepening and broadening. This is Jupiter coming in. Your understanding, Scorpio, Sag, on deep, deep levels of what's real power and false power. Or if you are by any chance familiar with the author David Hawkins and the book Power versus Force, that might be a good book for you, sweetie. Power versus force. And another way of saying it is the chalice versus the blade. Okay, the plow versus the sword. Those are different phrases of, that exertion of will and power over by force versus really recognizing deep inner authentic power and then being empowering, first of all, yourself and then others. So there could be confusion in thought and confusion in deed of this whole issue of power versus force. Does that make sense?
100%. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And would you say, because you're not 22 years old, you are, one of my favorite words is the wisdom of the crone. You've had these life experiences now to then reflect and say, oh yeah, this was a lot of what I have been learning through these various uh, contests of will and power issues and power struggles. And
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
and so I guess I'm giving example to anyone else who's listening live or in the future. Resolution node, south node, we've got to go back to the past in some way, readdress, resolve, heal, and as that becomes understood and resolved, then Mercury starts to find more and more clarity. One of the things that you could do, okay, with this Mercury being in a double water signature, a water sign, a water house, when you get to mental confusion, okay, when it can just, I don't know where I'm at, I can't figure this out, you could sometimes ask the question, how does it feel? How does it feel? And any subject, Mercury, any issue, Mercury, just go, well, how do I feel about this? How does this situation make me feel? And through your feelings, Mercury double water signature, okay, and asking how you feel, starting with the emotions. Mercury retrograde, it'll get you over to this Virgo area and you can analyze those feelings and get to mental clarity for you. Okay?
Yes. I love that.
How does it feel? And let's use, for example, the study of evolutionary astrology. And, sometimes how, so many of us, when we start working with, 10, 11 planets with Chiron, you add on the nodes, then we got 12 signs, we got 12 houses, now we got the aspects, and it just feels like we're just going to, go overboard. And so you could just step back and go, what feels like the best direction in studying? Should I study the Pluto formula? Should I study the 12 archetypes? You know, you can, you're doing that Mercury and Pisces 12th thing. You're backing up and asking a broad question, and you're coming in through your feelings. And again, it will help Mercury then process, analyze, Virgo, intuit what is best for you to get clarity. Now, for you and for everyone else, I want to bring in Mars square the nodes, okay? And we will redress Mars square the nodes in a couple classes here, all right, down the road. But to have this combust Mercury new phase Mars, this is a strong mitigating factor to Mercury square the nodes. It's almost impossible to separate the Mars. And what this is you get clarity through action. So another way for you to do this in addition to, you know, again, one perspective, what I just described. How does it feel and coming in through the emotions? Second way is to just find some movement, Mars, some action that allows you to be in motion and the brain will think again. And of course, your chart with 3 planets, including the Sun in Pisces 12th, and, you know, the nodal axis in, you know, Gemini Sag, it would be nature. Just getting yourself out in nature. Even Uranus in a Gemini third house signature. Jeffrey Green's teachings in the Uranus book, he was part of the Uranus in Gemini generation. I want to say, I'm trying to remember. I think Jeffrey was 1946 birth date, but he too had Saturn, balsamic, Pluto, although his was ninth, and he had a Uranus in Gemini, and he said the Uranus in Gemini mini generation was brain switching. Left brain, right brain, left brain, right brain, left brain, right brain. And the polarity Sag was learning how to move over to that right brain, see the larger picture, and then allow Uranus to fill in the details. And one of the ways to do that, because this is the mutable archetype, is motion, walks in nature, sitting by water, working with animals, taking the pets for, you know, a walk, being the gardener, you know, just getting out in nature would be one of the best actions for you to be able to calm the mind and think more clearly and act more clearly. What we will find out in a couple of classes from now with Mars square the nodes is there's skip steps with actions. And Mars is act react. We make an action to learn from the experience. And when Mars is square the nodes, there's confusion over how to act. There's confusion over which steps to take. Mars square the nodes can mean that there could have been impulsive actions that were never integrated, so there was no experience from the action that we learned from. It will perhaps intensify the confusion. So hence saying point 2, how important it is to find some type of healthy motion and action to give you a sense of peace, Pisces, to give you clarity, to then allow with that Virgo polarity point, what is the next step? Step 1, step 2, step 3. Have I emphasized nature enough? Versus
Got that one.
versus, you know, sitting inside 4 stone walls, you know, with your hands together trying to pray yourself perfect. I mean, I look at your chart and, I see the nun, going, Holy Father, help me, help me, help me, help me, Holy Father, blah, 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 blah. And then I see the crusader with the sword going, well, that didn't work. I'm just going to go out there and fight for my beliefs. And doing both, and neither one brought clarity. So there's a confusion of inaction, Virgo, and there is the confusion of impulsive or confused actions with the Mercury Mars square the nodes. All right. So as you can get into healthy motion in nature, it's going to then help you automatically deepen psychological understandings, help you deepen your awareness of what's truth and what's not. And even if becoming, a great speaker in this lifetime eludes you, that's not the lesson. It's for you to find clarity within your own brain.
Mm-hmm.
Mercury in Pisces 12 with a resolution node in South Node, Sag, 8th house. To find your own inner clarity that allows you to feel inner peace. And then you will have the opportunities where the speaking is clear and the opportunities where you just non-verbally speak and you actually live second house, your North Node. Helpful?
Yes, helpful.
You're
Good
going,
story.
yeah. I know, and you're fine. You're fine to if my words, take that Mercury Pisces and just your imagination just goes off. That is, that's natural for you.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, let me just see if there's anything else. Let me see if Leroy has anything from anybody on the board with questions or comments with anything that we're talking about. And if you volunteer, do you have questions with anything on your chart? We can bring in other rulers or aspects or anything else. Mhm.
Kim, I started to study about I listened to your webinar on the evolutionary phases, and it fascinating. Oh my gosh. And so in the beginning, as I'm listening, I'm thinking that I'm like maybe the third stage of consensus, because it felt to me like I'm having a very difficult time fitting in, and yet I have the guilt and the fear of individuating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then as I was listening to the individuation, I'm going, oh, okay, I could be first stage individuation, because I realize also I don't fit in.
Mm-hmm.
So that in a way that was helpful, because this is all new, this lifetime. This does not feel at all comfortable being part of the consensus.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just my my hit on that, and I think that that's an incredible interesting way of looking at us and our evolutionary phases. But it was very helpful to me.
Yes. And I, will agree with you, because everything that I've said, taking any subject and how does it feel, and trusting what you get for an intuitive hit until an intuitive hit shows you otherwise. So yes, that could definitely be the case for you. And if we would be looking at this movement into, this first stage individuated, I I hope I mean this in a very non-judgmental way. What a beauty to find evolutionary astrology and cut through a lot of waste in the individuated state.
Mm.
Because the individuated state is, let me try this belief, let me try that belief, let me try atheism, let me try this idea, let me try that idea. Individuated as it goes through first, second, third, first of all, has to find that courage to break free from consensus. Then it turns into that rebel from consensus, which may be where you are as well, second individuated, to then get to that third individuated where we get that inner peace of this is me and I'm different from everybody else and it's perfectly okay. And then that, will eventually spark into that first spirituated. But and again, I mean this as non-prejudicially as I can. I just haven't, in my own 60 years of searching, I haven't found a tool better than evolutionary astrology for explaining things to me. And if it exists out there, I welcome it showing up in my life. But I just, I like the, and here I'm saying it from Kim Marie's perspective, I like the simplicity of the philosophy of EA and then how it is so naturally explained through the archetypes of the zodiac in all its many, many individualistic ways as individual souls. And yet we're all trying to go to that same place. So yes, and if we would look at that, let's look at this from third consensus to first individuating, okay? That doesn't mean you do not know within your soul what natural spiritual principles are. Okay?
Right.
You just came through a lot of confusion around it and a lot of patriarchal distortions. And hopefully through your EA studies and other spiritual studies, you're going to make light bulb leaps in expanding consciousness and understanding. Yet this Mercury signature will recognize it faster than you can speak it or explain it, and that's okay.
Yes. Yeah. Very true.
If we look at it through that, moving from first into second individuated, okay, that would explain some of the anger in addition to this Mercury Mars signature in this particular sign and house, okay? And it would be, I am busting out of these patriarchal conditionings come one way or another. And through this resolution node for Mercury Mars, through this resolution node, it will help calm down the anger because you're going to return to your inner self-empowerment, which then lessens that willfulness that I have to get them before they get me, that I have to power my way through, or force my way through. No, I get to stand in my own inner power as my connection to source becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. And I get to fight less and be more. That makes sense?
Yes, beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. So yes, I would say that yes, you're somewhere along that path. And you do in, my world, you have, Chiron in a water sign, Jupiter water sign house, Mars, Mercury, Sun, water signs and houses, okay? Um, those planets relative to a moon in Capricorn 10th, on an emotional level, you came in emotionally suppressed. And that's why asking this question, how does it feel, was just foreign to you. You were so busy having to exert this will and being confused about which way to act and think. You didn't have this emotional maturity. This is something that has crawled out of your womb this lifetime, especially as you got
Exactly.
away especially as you got away from a lot of the familial conditionings, and you broke free from various familial situations. You then, this started opening up, and it's also why a double earth signature, it was another reason why with all this Pisces energy, I said you need to ask that question, how does it feel? And with this moon signature, you need to ask and ask and ask until the emotions actually reveal themselves. And once the emotion reveals itself, again, the clarity will start to come. All right, thank you for remembering that one, because I had the note, but there was my I'm in my right brain. And sometimes those left brain details, oh yeah. we all do it. Another question, and let me check in with Leroy. Comments or questions from anyone else on the board?
We've been interacting with a few associates on the board, but I think we're pretty clear. If there's any other questions, I'll just invite anybody to ask that via the Q&A panel, and I'll pass it along to you, Kim, okay?
Sure, we'll take a moment for that. And I just want to check in with our volunteer one more time. Anything that, any other questions? Any other areas of your chart?
Feels like I'm learning how to be a woman in this lifetime. And feel.
That could be. We don't have any of the strong signatures that say gender change, but you can look at a Saturn-Pluto conjunction as being involved in some of the gender switching, if that's it. We could look at this moon signature as being there. It may be that you just need to, you feel even as a woman, you've got to bring out your masculine side, because when you've been a woman in past, it was hurtful. So I don't know if I can look at that. And yet, as you allow these emotions to come up, and as you get more in touch with that, then even this resolution node in the 8th house, which is the emotions, allowing to not see the feminine as weak. I have a poster that I absolutely love of a Native American woman sitting with a wolf, and I got it back in my college days. And the quote to the poster is, "Nothing is as strong as true gentleness, and nothing is as gentle as true strength." And it's been one of my favorite quotes, because again, it's that power versus force thing. And when consensus force recognizes that inner empowerment, then we can lay down the sword, not to mention the nuclear bomb.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, there could be some possible gender switching, but it could also be that you're just more in touch with the masculine side, your masculine energies, and needing to, again, go back and review and heal that perspective of femininity being weak.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any others? Leroy?
No, a few general questions came through, and I'm kind of encouraging an associate to kind of go to the Facebook group, and put out a post. There was a post about, or a question about squares in the chart, where do you focus on a reading with over 5 squares in the chart? And I've just invited the associate to kind of, always remember to start with squares to Pluto or the nodes, but perhaps, yeah.
You start with the slowest moving planet. If there's 5 planets in a squares or grand cross, you start with the slowest moving planet, and every faster moving planet is compared to that. Are they waxing squares or waning squares? Waxing are crescent in first quarter, waning are disseminating in last quarter. And yes, you can, definitely take those types of questions to the Facebook page if you would like. And you're even welcome to take, when we do the monthly class and we've had an individual chart like this that we have looked at, if you want to continue any discussion about the chart in Facebook, by all means, we can definitely do that. Because the theory part of the PowerPoint slides, I've been able, to kind of shorten up a little bit and allow more time for chart interpretation. I have specifically wanted to do the planets square the nodes interpretation relative to Pluto and the nodes in the entire chart. So we are going a little more inclusive in the entire chart with this class series.
Thank you.
All right, last call. Questions, comments? All right. Well, I really want to thank our volunteer very much for showing up at the last minute Mercury and giving me a volunteer for Mercury Square the Nodes. Thank you very much, my dear.
Oh, thank you, Kim and Laura.
Oh, you bet. And I will say if oh, wait a minute. 2 more slides. Hold on. I do need a volunteer for Venus Square the Nodes. All right. And as you can see down here, I still need some volunteers for Chiron through Pluto, and I have Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. So Venus Square the Nodes, please email me or just go to the website and contact us. And if I don't get a volunteer, then if you have a family member with Venus Square the Nodes, we'll take them into consideration as well. Excuse me. And then, of course, happy Thanksgiving to anybody in the U.S. and many thanks and gratefuls to everybody worldwide. Next week on Wednesday will be the free Mercury retrograde in Sag, and then I will start my 5-part series on Saturn in Capricorn, and I will include Pluto in Capricorn, and I think even Jupiter and what it will do as it moves into there as well. So a little busy here at the beginning of December if you're interested in any of the public classes. All right, so thank you everyone, and I will see you, what is it, December 19th for Venus Square the Nodes. Adios, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, sweetie. Are you